Chapter 19. Necessitas non habet legem. Webb couldn't tell if she was unconscious or dead. All she knew was a screaming in her head and pain, but not hers. She gasped awake, her lungs rattling. She smelled ozone and smoke, felt sparks spitting on her like hot grease. She was lying on her stomach on something uncomfortable, something jagged. Wind ruffled her hair. Wind? She pushed herself up off of the snapped-off helm console. The bow and port side of the bridge were missing, gone all the way to the command dais, sheared off by the impact with the Xeno ruins. Most of the control stations had been milled off with it, along with anyone unlucky enough to be manning them. Webb craned her neck up at the hexagonal ruins. Even with the ship tilted to stern, the rocks soared several stories above. It wasn't the solid facade she remembered. Stretches of the ruins were little more than gravel now, with much of what remained cratered and baked by the dead ship's gigalasers. She heard groaning behind her, groaning and keening. She unbuckled herself. The folks who'd clung to the command ring had fared well. The others, not so much. Dead crew, red shirts, soldiers, Armstrongs alike, lay scattered about. Some burnt beyond recognition where their consoles had burst. A hiccup. 8 was still at ops. The only console that hadn't exploded or been sheared off at the impact. She was clinging to it like a life preserver, as if it might disappear at any moment. Yolanda helped Webb to her feet. "You all right?" "I think so. You?" "Yeah." She looked stunned, but otherwise unhurt, which meant the hollow emitters were still running. Otherwise, she'd have started to look like an irradiated corpse. "Webb!" sobbed Frankie. She was kneeling by the engineering station. A gray-haired body lay like a twisted blanket beside her. "No." Webb rushed through the debris on shaking legs. "Chief?" Dewey's neck was bent at an impossible angle. Webb wanted to scream for a medic, to jam Dewey full of hypos or to teleport her into a biobed. Do something, anything, other than accept that the chief was gone, without final word or blessing, dead as a broken doll. "I killed her." Webb shook her head as if that might dislodge the thought. She'd botched the landing, crashed the ship into the ruins, and killed who knew how many crew. Not that anyone would survive long on this planet anyway. "Hey!" Frankie grabbed Webb's head and turned it to face hers. "It's not your fault. The fact that any of us are alive is because you got us down." Shame stabbed her heart. The chief would agree with me. She's no more your fault than 7 getting fried was hers. If you want to lay blame, lay it where it belongs. The door to the captain's cabin had bent in the crash. A pair of bloodied red shirts dragged Blackwell out and threw him to the deck. He sat up on his knees with a defiant smirk. Webb's face burned. "You lowered our shields." He raised his chin. "I completed my mission." "The chief is dead because of you." "I think you've got that backwards." Webb snatched a sidearm from a body and pressed it to Blackwell's forehead. "I should blow your bunking head off! Go on! Do it! Show them who you are." That smirk again. "I'm already a hero. Make me a martyr. They'll name a ship after me. A whole class of ships." Webb could feel the eyes of the survivors on her, her hand shaking. She sucked in a breath. 8? 8 jerked her away. "Did the comms survive?" She checked the console. "Yes." "Open all channels, whatever's left." The comms whistled open. "Anyone who's still with us, make for the bridge. We've got a better chance of surviving together." "Hey." Chels poked her head down from the hole above. Webb had no idea when she'd climbed up there, or how, with one arm. "The body of the ship landed a few Ks away, and the Xenos are starting to pop out of it." Webb peered up at her. "How do they look?" Chels ducked out of sight for a moment. "Lot of cracks in them, but they're still moving." Webb jammed the sidearm in her toolband and clambered up the juts in the shorn-off bulkhead, through the chopped-in insulation deck, up to the hull plating atop the bridge's dome. She found Chels there having a smoke on a sensor node. "Careful," Chels offered her rangefinder. "The wind's a bitch." Webb fought off the vertigo and peered through the rangefinder. The body of the ship had landed several kilometers away. Xenos wriggled out of it like drunken termites. Some lay motionless on the sands. Others carried writhing ones from the hull. Still others were forming up in clusters. Doesn't look like they're in much shape to hit us. It's their friends down here I'm worried about. Chels took another drag. The smell of it was enticing. Hey, could I hit that? Sure, but won't you... She swirled a finger at her chest. Nah, filter's broken. Well, shit. Chels handed over the cig. Have at it. Webb took a deep drag. Thanks. We're moving soon. Copy. Webb heard shouting before she'd climbed back down to the bridge. She arrived to find Blackwell and the Armstrongs arrayed against a wall. A knot of angry, armed redshirts turned her way the moment she appeared. The Zetos are forming up, she told them. What's this? It won't take a minute, said a redshirt. We were just following orders, screamed at Armstrong. Webb shook her head. We're not doing that now. They crashed the ship, barked the crewman. Killed Sivos and my quaddy and half of our soldiers. We're not doing that now. She put a hand on his weapon. Right now, we have to put as much distance between us and the Silicons as we can. But they will face justice. Blackwell scoffed. Your justice? Ours, said Frankie. Or theirs? Webb looked a question at her. A grin. She's been looking forward to seeing you again. Frankie turned to address the bridge. Everyone, please don't freak out. A shadow fell over the bridge as an enormous Xeno loomed into the gap, prompting a chorus of strangled screams. A forest of spray wands turned its way. Abelhard shook his head in wonder. So great a wolf I've never seen. Don't! Frankie jumped between the spray wands and the Xeno. She's here to help! Webb, don't you recognize her? The back of Webb's skull tingled. From the ruins. The 5-meter-tall Xeno from the magnetite chamber. In the light, it had a crackle pattern to its armor, similar to the cracks in Frankie's Celadon teacups. The great silicant regarded Webb with compound eyes. The pressure in Webb's head increased. She's trying to speak to you, said Frankie. Mind to mind. With headaches and nightmares? It's how they communicate. She's been trying to talk to us since we've arrived in the system, since you first made contact. Frankie brushed the back of her head. The migraines, you felt them back here? Seen images you can't explain? Headaches, yeah. Webb couldn't tear herself away from the depths of those eyes. And I saw stuff, but only when you're unconscious? Webb gaped at her. You've seen it too? It's the only time we can hear them. Our minds are so loud. It's like trying to talk to someone across a crowded room. Frankie held out a hand. The giant Xeno extended a forelimb, its arm blade sheathed, to touch the tip of her finger. How the hell do you know this? She told me. She started talking to me when you couldn't hear her. Because we're close, you and I. From the same hive cell. Hive? Quad. Sorry, it's hard to translate. We need to go, Chels called down. The ones from the ship are coming. Frankie nodded. The zealots, from a militarized sect. The elder can help us, but we have to trust her. Webb looked to the crew. A trickle of survivors had swelled their ranks. Most of them bore injuries of one kind or another. Few were anywhere near fighting form. They stared at the giant Xeno, Bunket, the elder. Might as well start thinking of her that way. In trepidation. The elder shifted aside, revealing a tunnel leading into the rocks. She'll take us to our other raft. Ship. Sorry. Frankie shook her head. I'm thinking in her terms. The Flagstaff. She'll take us there. She spoke to me as well, said the Sorrel ambassador. We can indeed trust her. Webb felt 100 set of eyes on her. They're waiting for your decision, Abelhard whispered. You are their leader. Webb let out a long breath. If Frankie trusts her, that's good enough for me. Grab what you can, folks. Medkits, rations, and spray packs. What about them? Sedlak gestured to the Armstrongs. They'd make a nice decoy. Jacob's voice cracked. You can't leave us here. Webb shook her head. No more dead crew. Chels, cuffs. Oh, sure, asked the soldier with one arm. Hang on. Chels tossed down a pair. Webb cuffed Blackwell, who never took his eyes off her. "Keep them under guard," she told Sedlak. "Let's move out." Webb? There's about 3 meters between the bridge and the tunnel." She looked out the gap. "And the drop's at least..." The elder bent forward, arching its back to bridge the gap. Frankie was the first to cross. As if that gave them permission, the rest followed, the ones armed with spray packs taking up firing positions while the hail helped the injured across. Webb helped folks through the debris and over the elder until only she, Yolanda, and Abelhard remained. "You must go while the Xenos are distracted," Abelhard told her. "I'll be right behind you." Abelhard. Webb's stomach dropped. Why? He wasn't even real. "I'm afraid you can't come with us." He looked amused. "You keep telling me this, and yet here I remain." "I don't know how to explain this in terms you'll understand." "I'm no simpleton." He crossed his arms. "I've read several of Mr. Faraday's works, I'll have you know." "The hollow emitters don't reach beyond the ship," she told him. "There is nothing beyond the hull, beyond this ledge, that can reflect back the fields that give you substance." "I admit, I was certainly more selfish when we first met, but I thought I'd overcome that bit of immaturity." "Are you coming?" belted Chelsea. "Listen to me." She set her hands on his chest, tried not to look at Yolanda. "You have to stay. You cannot exist in our world. You are composed of pixels and light." "Maybe once." He took her hands in his. "But you've helped me become so much more." "If you step off the ship, you'll die." He touched her face. "I've told you before, my love." That perfect smile, that soothing baritone. "My love for you makes me real." He stepped out of the bridge and vanished. His spray pack clattered down the side of the ruins to shatter on the sands below. Yolanda let out a hard sigh and closed her eyes. "Hey," Webb grabbed her shoulders. "That's not going to happen to you." "No?" Her eyes reddened. "I won't vanish. Just the parts holding me together. Capillaries, neurons. I can't leave you here." Webb's throat felt thick. "But we can't stay here." "You can't." Yolanda stole a look down the tunnel where Blackwell stood with his guards and shrunk in on herself. "If I leave, I'll fall apart." Blackwell shrugged his hands. "If you just could have been happy, none of this would have happened." Webb gritted her teeth. "Get him out of here." His keepers yanked him away. Webb put her body between him and Yolanda so she could only look at her. "I only just found you. There is no way I'm leaving you behind. I'm half hologram, Webb." "We really have to go." Chelsea peered through her viewfinder. "They're 5Ks off and closing." "The jarhead's right." Yolanda wiped her face. "You know what you have to do. At least keep the comms on. There should be enough power for that." Webb felt helpless. Helpless and useless. "We'll get the Flagstaff's teleporter working and TP you to the infirmary there." A single nod. "That's a nice thought." "I will make it happen. I'll be all right." She idly picked up a fallen rifle. "If the Xenos come, I'll destroy the emitters. It'll be like going to sleep." "Yolanda. Joni, you've helped me more than you will ever know. Whatever happens to me now, I'm in charge. It's my choice. I'll be okay. There are others you can help." Webb seized her in a fierce embrace. Yolanda broke the hug too soon, forced a smile, and turned her towards the tunnel. Webb crossed the elder's back, but kept her eyes on Yolanda's as she followed the line of limping crew down the tunnel through the ruins. Webb numbly followed the survivors through the dark, her arm on the shoulder of the crewmate ahead of her. Down the trail went, gradually and then sharply, but never at such a steep angle that they were in danger of losing their footing. Webb wondered if this had been an existing tunnel, or if the elder had made it for them. She kept her ears strained for chittering. She heard some, deeper, more resonant, and much farther ahead. "That's the elder," said Frankie. "How do you know I was wondering that?" "She taught me a few things." A dim blue light glimmered far ahead. She heard gasps of wonder as they passed into a tunnel with familiar blue streaks in the stones, stripes and dots and whorls. The tunnel widened into a vast open chamber eerily lit by soft blue light. Webb recognized a collapsed stack of stones. "I was here," she muttered, "with Haroon." The magnetite chamber. It was half the size she remembered it. Most of its floor space lay buried in fallen rocks. "She wanted to meet us here," Frankie said quietly. She touched the shattered Xeno statue surrounded by magnetite. "This was how she'd planned to talk to us." Behind the broken statue, the elder had taken a seat on its hind limbs. Even folded in half, it towered a meter above the tallest of the crew. "Talk to us?" Webb picked up some fallen magnetite. "With these?" "They were going to show us how they speak, how they think, what we've been doing to them, the damage our Terratech and Agrochems have done to their colonies here and on other worlds. They were going to tell us about their schism, how their society split over how to respond to the death we've brought." Her face fell. "They can't now." Webb was lost. "Can't what?" "Show us." She idly overturned a chunk of magnetite. "Because we destroyed the chamber when we scoured the planet." "You've lost me." "They communicate by... I'm not sure what we'd call it. Telekinetopathy? Kinetotelepathy?" Frankie swirled a hand around her scalp. "They've got a chamber, an imaging chamber, here in their heads, and they form images there magnetically with particles. They can do that with each other, literally form pictures in each other's minds. That's the clicking we hear, the whirling bits forming into images. It's a perfect form of communication." The elder concentrated on a pair of magnetite columns still standing. A cloud of glittering dust whipped up, formed briefly into a rough outline of a person before it fell apart. "They can't show us now," Frankie repeated. "Not without the magnetite crushed by the cave-ins. It's exceptionally hard for them to, I guess we'd say, talk outside their heads." Webb tilted her head. "But they can talk to you." "Not all of them. Just the ones who've done the deep work." She smiled affectionately at the elder. "Who've learned to communicate without the manipulation of physical particles. Who've leapt to metaphor and abstraction, which, believe me, is a hard concept when you're used to picture-perfect literalness of thought." "So..." Webb looked from Frankie to the elder. "She can communicate with you right now." "I suppose my mind was calm enough. The others..." Frankie's smile faded. "The zealots who invaded the ship, they had elders as well. They took the survivors of the Flagstaff, pulled pictures of how to use our tech from their minds, our teleporters, weapons." She looked up at the elder. "When they learned she was trying to talk to us, they sealed her in here." The buried shaft she'd stumbled upon. "Why?" "They had no interest in diplomacy, only vengeance, hurting us as hard as they could. Anyway, her plan for peace is all dust now. All wreckage, like our ship." The elder clicked and chittered something to Frankie. Frankie nodded. "She'll take us to the raft now." Webb felt a knot in her belly. "She's letting us go?" "She wants to get us off planet before the zealots execute us." Frankie followed the elder into an adjacent chamber. Webb led the crew after them. More elders were waiting for them there. Few were as large as Frankie's elder, but all stood at least twice the height of the Xenos who'd invaded the ship. Most were brown, of various shades, though the smaller ones were just streaked with the color across otherwise silver plating. Must be a sign of aging. "There's enough for each of us," said Frankie. "For each of us?" She nodded. "It's faster if we ride." Webb lost track of time. Clinging to the elder's back, riding through a network of tunnels dark as pitch, she fell into the rhythm of its movement and eventually drifted off into sleep. She awoke abruptly when her elder stopped. It was far too dark to see, but the new space felt larger and warmer. A couple of red shirts tossed up the glow bulbs from their lamps, as she had in the magnetite chamber ages ago. This time, the bulbs hovered. Around them lit up a wondrous grotto of living stone. Its waters were still and mineral clear, reflecting teals and reds from the bottoms of its many pools. Steam rose languidly from a cluster of natural chimneys. Must be the source of the heat. Webb spotted Frankie taking in their surroundings with a serene expression. "So beautiful, isn't it? I thought they were taking us to the ship." "They are," said Frankie. "They needed to bring us here first." She pointed to the pool. Red shirts were already crouched along its edge, drinking like gazelles at a watering hole. She indicated a row of ration packs stacked along the wall. Those are for us. Webb's stomach rumbled. From the Flagstaff? Frankie nodded. Same place the Zealots got the pressure suit. Webb tore into a pack, bit into a chunk of drywall claiming to be meatloaf. Wouldn't it have been faster to take us to the ship? We weren't just stopping for food. That's when Webb heard it, a different alien sound, not one she'd heard the Silicons make, an almost avian peeping. The ambassador's feathers rose into a crest. She hunched her shoulders and hissed like a swan looking for a fight. What's with her? The ambassador emitted a complex alto trill. The earlier peeping fell silent. Then it erupted again, faster and louder. On a flattened stone table by a chimney lay the remains of Captain Seagrave. In his chest cavity, in a nest made from his uniform and ribs, peeped a clutch of tiny blue spiky-feathered dinosaurs. The ambassador flitted over and cooed like a songbird. The hatchlings changed their tone and swarmed her, climbing up and around her shoulders to nestle under the feathers of her crest. The ambassador made a sound Webb took as a laugh. Little things must have tickled. The sorrel said something in her musical language to the elder. Webb looked to Frankie for an explanation. So did most everyone else. Frankie took a half-eaten slab of tofu from her mouth. They brought her hatchery here when they discovered Seagrave was pregnant. Webb blinked. What? Well, they couldn't very well let them hatch on the Flagstaff, could they? Said Frankie. The Zealots also knew where it is. The meat-flavored drywall tasted like ashes. They know where she's taking us? It's okay. Frankie spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Her attendants have been making all kinds of noise in the tunnels, disguising their pheromone trails, and their acolytes have been sealing the shafts behind us. Okay. Webb looked at the sorrel. Now about the pregnant thing. Every eye turned to the ambassador. He made his interest to mate quite clear, she sniffed. I assumed he'd taken precautions. It is the host's responsibility, after all. Webb tried not to stare at the hollowed-out torso. Did he know it was going to kill him? The Xenos killed him, said Frankie. To be fair. The ambassador spread her hands. He expressed a sincere desire to make inroads to demonstrate his people's commitment to a wider galactic community. Based on his behavior, mating was part of that expression. It would have been rude to refuse. She scratched a hatchling's chin. All the information on our reproductive cycle was in the, what do you call it, xenobiology report. She must have reviewed it beforehand, surely. For all the bizarre and horrible things that had happened today, the crew apparently decided that their captain's body being used as an incubator wasn't enough to warrant continuous attention, and turned back to their ration packs. The sorrel took Webb aside. We have not been properly introduced. I am Ambassador See Me, Midi, Me He, Jean Breed, chirped the hatchlings beneath her crest. Is there something I could call you for short? That is the shortened version, said the sorrel. Though I suppose See Me would suffice. It's a bit odd reducing my entire identity to a paired phoneme, but we do what we must. And you are? Joni Weber. Webb extended her hand. Former technician and crew advocate. Call me Webb. See Me seemed confused. You're not the acting captain? Oh, God, no. But you are clearly in command. I suppose? Webb felt uncomfortable. Nothing's official. I'm just trying to get us somewhere safe. Your command structure continues to baffle. Do you think you can repair the other ship? I hope so. I won't know until we've seen it. If you succeed, where will you go? She hadn't thought about it. It's not safe for us here, in Coalition space. Officially, we're mutineers. And if we do get the Flagstaff up and flying, we'd be pirates. She could see it now. A sector-wide manhunt for their crippled life raft of a ship. They'll send more ships, not just to pick up the lifeboats, to catch us, or blow us out of the stars. Why would they commit so many resources to regaining so little? It's not the value of the ship, said Webb. It's the message it would send, that a mutiny was possible, that a crew could survive without officers. It would give other crews ideas. Simi bobbed her head. I see. We've got people in orbit. Webb's limbs felt shaky. In a shuttle adrift. And the meat locker. Everyone heard Fontana's message, and that puts them in danger. Simi raised her own crest. You believe your government would harm its own citizens? They were willing to destroy the Independence to keep their secret. They'd knock that shuttle into Atmo without a second thought. I see. Simi straightened, raised a fan of speckled feathers. I would like to offer you asylum. As individuals, not as a species. You have a long way to go on that front. Webb's heart fluttered. You can do that? I represent the united flocks of Midi as well as the Galactic Union, she said. Our federation offers protections to refugees in need of asylum and extraction from war zones. I believe you were unaware of the crimes of your government and are in danger of retribution. Clearly, there are different sects of humans, as there are of silicons. You qualify for asylum. Well, shit. Webb saluted with her meatloaf. We accept. It is contingent, unfortunately, said Simi. You must get yourselves into orbit on a working vessel first. The ship coming to collect me is not large enough to take you all, nor could it defend itself against one of your warships. But if you can reach the stars, I will grant you passage into Union space, where you can plead for refugee status. The elder chittered something. Frankie set a hand on Webb's shoulder. It's time to go. For hours more, they rode through a disorienting series of tunnels, shockingly dark and silent, but for the clicking of limbs on stone and the cooing of Simi's hatchlings. Gradually, the plunking of claws on stone flowed into a grinding on gravel. Webb blinked in a half-light that was blinding after so much darkness. They had entered a colossal chamber, at least 3 kilometers wide and equally as high, its walls jagged and shimmering with crystalline reflections. Loose light spilled through the shattered dome of its ceiling onto a floor of violet gravel that gave way to lilac sand. A gargantuan geode. Far across the chamber, at the end of a furrow carved by its crash, lay the battered wreck of the flagstaff. Webb peered through Chelsea's rangefinder. The ship didn't look good, by any means. But neither did she look unsalvageable. She could see no hull breaches from her vantage point. The crew dismounted to cross the cavern on foot, spray packs and rifles held at the ready in the vast open space. It was quiet but for the crunching of gravel underfoot. Even the Armstrongs seemed to marvel at the primordial beauty of the chamber. A series of mounds came into view as they neared the flagstaff. Webb knew what they were before they were close enough to identify. Graves, dug with no particular skill nor arrangement. Dozens of them. Webb's caravan paused for a silent moment before passing them by. The flagstaff rose above them, maybe 10 decks high. A whittled wedge of a ship that could never be considered aerodynamic. From the looks of it, it had already been excavated. The furrow it had carved in its landing had been leveled out, the stone and sand dug away from its lowest decks. Webb circled around the ship. Its other side also appeared unbreached. She approached an airlock near ground level, held out Dennis so he could see it. Dennis, open the ship. Dented hinges protested as the airlock swung open. The elder chittered something. Webb looked to Frankie. What did she say? This is where we part. Frankie touched the elder's forelimb. She said, You carry the truth to your people. I'll take it to mine. The elders skittered away over the sands. Webb led the survivors into the flagstaff. Its corridors were hacked and damaged. They were also lit. So the emergency power was still on, at least. It was a smaller ship than the Independence, its corridors narrower, its rooms more claustrophobic. No functionality sacrificed for creature comforts. But it certainly seemed durable. Deep space scouting vessels had to be. The ship's bridge bore the scars of heavy repair, but nothing seemed broken, aside from a chopped-up cog on the floor. It was quartered, its head cleaved neatly in half from crown to chin. Frankie stared down at it. Xenos? I don't know what else could have done that. She looked up to find the crew looking at her, waiting for her to speak. Let's see what's working. Red shirts filed onto the bridge, some seating themselves at the duty stations, others heading further into the ship. I'll inventory supplies, said 8. Webb nodded. Sounds good. Frankie took in the bridge. She's not nearly as damaged as I thought. My thoughts exactly, said Webb. I was expecting a wreck. They really built these deep space babies to last. It should be more damaged, said Webb. From that fall? Breaking through the lava dome? Frankie checked the ops console. Repairs have been made. Not good ones. The welds were crude, the patches rough. Dewey would have chewed them out for work that sloppy. But they're holding. Some jerry-rigging, too. I'll run diagnostics. Please do. See what it'll take to limp us into orbit. Copy. Frankie pressed a few buttons. The rows of terminals lit up. That seemed promising. What systems are up? Frankie checked. Life support, shields, comms, and... the arcade? Webb checked the console. There's an arcade? Right off the bridge, Frankie pointed. It's been running for weeks. Webb toggled the comms open, broadcast widely. Yolanda, this is Webb. We've reached the flagstaff. Do you read? Static hissed over the channel. It's the rock, said Frankie. It's interfering with the signal. Webb hit the comms again. Yolanda, please respond. A chirp from the comms. Here. Yolanda's voice was full of static. Webb whooped. There's an arcade on the flagstaff. She whirled on Frankie. Do we have any teleporters? Are they up? Frankie tapped a few keys. Yes on both. Webb's heart leapt. We can TP you into the arcade. Yolanda hesitated. That's a lateral step. For now, Webb calmed back. But the ship is salvageable. We can keep you alive in there until we can figure out how to restore you. The line went quiet. I need to gather a few things. Webb pumped her fist. Ping me when ready for transport. She slid Dennis's spine through a gap at the command rail. Dennis, interface with the ship. Dennis's face twitched. His eyes rolled back in his head. Greetings, Admiral, he said in a velvety alto. I am the flagstaff. Webb looked at Frankie. Does she mean me? Looks like she's going off Dennis's perception. Frankie grinned. Admiral, the captain is waiting for you in the arcade, the ship said through Dennis. Blackwell stepped forward. Flagstaff, I am the highest-ranking officer on this vessel. I have been kidnapped. Shut up, warned Chels. You do not talk to me that way, he spat. Chels slammed him in the gut with her spray wand. He doubled over. You were saying, Admiral? Keep bringing systems up, Webb told Frankie. Patch anything you need to get us spaceworthy. Frankie saluted with a smirk. Admiral? Shut up. Dennis? Open the arcade. Webb stepped from the bridge into a rustic log cabin with snow whirling against its windows. The door back to the bridge slid shut and faded into a timber wall. By the hearth, a figure in a violet uniform was feeding logs into a crackling fire. Captain Fontana? The figure straightened. Welcome. I can't say I expected an admiral, especially considering what the Admiralty has done. I'm not an admiral. No point lying if she wanted to get on his good side. I'm a senior tech from the Independence. We had to futz with the permissions to navigate the ship. We were sent to find you. He twitched. I am J.G. Fontana, captain of the Flagstaff. Webb nodded a hello. Nice cabin, Captain. I can see why you stayed in the arcade. It's safer here than out there. He folded his hands behind his back. My crew is dead. The Silicons would have killed me as well if my engineer hadn't hidden me in a teleporter loop. Webb grunted. Is that how you survived? He gestured to a sofa. You're gonna want to sit down. If this is about the Xeno genocide and the orders from the Admiralty, we know. We got your message. Oh, thank God. We also know about the Xeno schism, the Zealots, and the Elder. Was she the one who helped you? He twitched again. After the crash and what I learned from the Elder, who spoke directly to my mind, my top priority was getting our comms back up so I could send that warning. It was slow going. I was the only survivor. My crew is dead. Yeah, you said. Webb shifted her feet. Something was off. We saw the graves. When I realized my signal was being blocked by the Coalition's subspace transceivers, I pivoted to repairing enough systems to get the ship back into orbit. If the Coalition was determined to block my message, Well then, by God, take it home in person. You've done a remarkable job, said Webb. My only question is why you haven't finished. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad you're still here. We'd be marooned otherwise. But why didn't you take the ship into orbit? Ah. Fontana dipped his chin. It's simple, really. There was no one left to command the ship. Captain? A shiver rippled over her skin. I'm not sure what you mean. I'm dead, Admiral, he said matter-of-factly. The cog killed me.